This media is brought to you by Polyscope.
In the realm of tomorrow, where techniques mind, we ponder, we dream.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to finally meet you because this is how we meet each other nowadays over Zoom. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Hi, thanks, Chris. I'm Dan Schwarz. I'm the CEO and co-founder of FutureSearch. We are an AI startup that is using AI to predict the future. Previously,
By the way, I love that name. That's an
Yeah.
awesome name.
Oh, I'm glad you like it. Yeah, it's actually not, it's not our original name, but it's stuck with us.
Nice.
Yeah, I kind of cut my teeth as a software engineer at Google for many years. I built a prediction market that is currently running there and got really fascinated by trying to predict the future using human intelligence. I then left Google to be the CTO of Metaculous, which is kind of the preeminent forecasting platform for the web.
Another exceptional name. Did you come up with that one?
No,
That's
no,
great.
Metaculous was created in 2015 as a riff on a Coen Brothers movie meme, actually. Um, yeah, 2015, long, long time ago. It was a good name for
10
great.
years ago is like ancient history, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable how much the world has changed in the last 10 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that forecasting platform predates even Tetlock and the super forecasting, the art and science of prediction. That book
Nice.
also feels very old now, but was really kind of the cornerstone of how I consider futurism and forecasting. But yeah, 2 years ago, got bit by the GPT-4 bug, realized to predict the future, I really wanted to get AIs to do it, not humans to do it. And that's what I've been up to since then.
But in a way, humans are doing it with AI, right? I mean, it's kind of like so if you think about what AI is, like what it consists of, you're just using a different tool to also sort of manipulate human knowledge in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think even the day that GPT 3.5 came out, which also feels like a long time ago, it was obvious that it had enough intelligence that it was at least coherent to ask it to try to predict things.
Yeah.
Forecasting, you have to understand the present, you have to be able to model things, you have to understand human dynamics and politics and all of those things. And even back then, it was tolerably intelligent.
Hmm.
People described it as kind of like a middle schooler, maybe high schooler level intelligence. It's not
Yeah.
crazy to ask a high schooler what will happen in 2 years, 5 years from now. Like I wouldn't trust it, but it's a reasonable thing to ask, and it's only been getting smarter and smarter since then.
So would you say that since there's some time has passed since you asked 3.5 questions, would you say how accurate would you say it was in its predictions?
So we have studied this at FutureSearch. GPT 3.5 was basically no better than chance for kind of the typical forecasting questions that you would ask, things that are resolved by a yes, no, or you have to give a probability, things where the things either do or do not happen within about 1 year. So they're very easy to measure and study, kind of the typical forecasting tournament that Tetlock has been running for many years.
Hmm.
GPT-4 was better than chance. Again, being better than chance already makes you better than like 80% of humans. Like
Oh
most
yeah.
humans are just not better than chance at this. But GPT-4 was still not comparable to smart humans, like skilled humans, humans who are good forecasters.
Right.
And models have gotten significantly better, but maybe only closed about half the distance between that and like the great forecasters, Tetlock super forecasters, like the pros that I worked with at Metaculous and the top forecasters that I worked with at Google. Humans are still king at forecasting, but the gap has significantly closed in the last 2 years.
Now, do you use that human input to make your predictions, or do you use just genetic like what kind of human input do you use?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess there's a handful of ways to try to get an AI system to output a forecast. The most basic way is to just ask it a question. You basically use a model that is pre-trained in the way that they're pre-trained, post-trained in the way that they're post-trained, formulate the question in some resolvable way. Just ask the question, take the output, write it down somewhere, and then score it based on what happens. Um, there's a couple things that are pretty easy to do on top of that. The very first thing FutureSearch did was do a kind of a chain of thought back when this was trendy. So we would ask the question, we would say, research this. What's been going on? Do some Google searches. Who are the people involved? What are their backgrounds? What are the base rates? When was the last time something like this happened? Kind of figure out all that stuff, and then at the end say, now make a prediction. Give me my probability, my date, my number. Another way to do it is to do reinforcement learning. So that would be kind of post-training a model and trying to actually encode into the model the ability to have good judgment. There's a couple of papers that have attempted this. It doesn't work very well, but it could work. And then there's the approach that FutureSearch has now, which is using agents. So you take
Mm.
an agent and you say, you have this task, and there's a bunch of scaffolding that goes into that. And it basically does what a human would do, which is try to research the problem in kind of an open-ended way, convince itself it has enough information, try to calibrate itself, and then output its best answer.
So what type of techniques does it use to try and extrapolate where things are going based on what it knows?
The thing about forecasting is that to do it really well, you basically have to model the entire world.
Right. Which is, of course, not really possible, but you can model parts of it.
Right. So that's, yeah. So this, I don't mean to be evasive to your question, but every question is a different beast. So, if I ask you a question like, will China invade Taiwan by 2028? That question, you would research it by trying to understand what's going on in China, what's going on in Taiwan. You want to get some information on all the ships that are moving around there. You want to see what people have said. You also want to look at kind of foreign conflicts between, large countries that have lost territory in the past and their attempts to reclaim it. Maybe a good base rate there would be like when the large country says they're going to go invade their neighbor that used to be part of their territory, how often do they actually do it? And how long does it take between them saying they're going to do it and actually doing it?
Right.
All sorts of stuff like that. But consider a different question. If I say something like, when is GPT-5 going to come out? Completely different set of considerations that would go into that. That's a question about product strategy. It's a question about technology. It's a question about, the frontier of science. And the nature of competition between AI labs. It's a question of regulation. Everything would be completely different in the way that you would analyze that. And this is one of the things that makes humans potentially very good at this, although most humans are quite bad at forecasting, I think, as you well know, because you kind of have one simple lens of thinking about the world. You try to fit everything into that model. Great human forecasters are unbelievably flexible. And it's really a privilege to work with great forecasters because they have such an open-minded way of exploring every problem, like meeting the world where it is, not where they kind of wish the world was. And so they would use a different technique for a different problem. And this is why modern AI, but not historical AI, is up to the task. Because AI is very knowledgeable, it's broad, it's flexible. If orchestrated properly, it can be as open-minded and as curious and try as many different things as an expert human would. But it is because there is no one simple formula. It's because it is an open question that makes it so difficult.
Well, what you mentioned earlier, even a simple question, it seems like a simple question. Both of those questions seem simple, but the amount of information that you need in order to get a good answer to those questions is just immense,
Yes.
right? And there's always that missing piece, right? You can never have a full set of information, even in a simple question like that. You can never have a full enough set of data to be able to really make an accurate determination. I mean, how accurate would a question like that be determined?
That's an excellent question. What is the frontier of accuracy that is even achievable?
Right.
For this, we kind of turn to weather forecasting, which is something for which we have many decades of data. Weather forecasting has taught us, it was less than 100 years ago. It was kind of an open question about how predictable is the weather.
Oh, it's way better now. The weather forecasting is leaps and bounds better than it used to be.
Yes, but prior to Mandelbrot, I think people thought that you could forecast the weather a month out, and you could do that with perfect accuracy if you simply built a large enough, IBM mainframe computer.
Exactly.
And it was only, the mathematical theories coming out of the 1950s and 60s that actually started to indicate this might be actually impossible. It may not be possible at all. With no amount of information could actually let you predict the state of the world in 1 month. You basically would have to simulate the entire planet Earth down to
exactly
every gas molecule.
Well, exactly. That's what I thought. That's what I always thought.
Yeah, well, I think there is a similar kind of irreducible complexity in almost everything. There's only so much you can figure out about China invading Taiwan. There's only so much you can figure out about OpenAI's plans, and there's only so much you can figure out about the frontier of science and what humanity will discover. What paths will work out and what will not work out. And so your goal as a forecaster is to get a grip on everything that is grippable, and it be calibrated in your uncertainty for everything for which there's just no way to figure it out. One frontier that we might be able to make rapid progress on, but has been very tough for a while, is just predicting the behaviors of one person. A lot of politics these days comes down to what one single person, and I think a couple of the people that I'm thinking about here. It's not kind of like an institutional system where there's a lot of kind of systems at play with forces that you can kind of trace. It's kind of someone wakes up on the wrong side of the bed and just makes a decision, and that turns into geopolitics as we know it. Can you predict what one person will do? it's no one has really demonstrated the ability to do this, but you can't really prove it's impossible either. Like, would you have to simulate their entire brain, or is it just getting enough information on their dispositions and you'd be able to figure it out? It's an open question.
I think that's probably way doable. I mean, because I keep thinking about things like you hear these reports about AI playing World of Warcraft, right, and
Hmm.
crushing all the human players,
Yeah.
and people are like, "Oh my God, look, they're taking over the world." I'm like, "Well, you can take over World of Warcraft because it's a finite system, it's a closed
Mhm.
system, and it's got a certain set of rules. So you throw AI at something like that, it'll be able to master it. But if you take the world, it's not a closed system. It has a simple set of rules. But maybe, like you say, an individual like you take an individual person and go, let's see what they're going to do. That might be a doable problem.
Yeah, another place we get evidence on this is financial forecasting. If you
Mm,
want to predict stock prices, good luck. If you're able to do that, that's worth billions of dollars.
right.
And not completely impossible. Markets aren't perfectly efficient, but just it proves just how difficult it is to even have the tiniest edge. But
Yeah.
if I ask you a simpler question, like how many cars will Ford sell next quarter? And you just look at the time series of how many cars Ford has sold every previous quarter, that can give you like very high accuracy, even though Ford selling cars is unbelievably complicated. There's this huge supply chain that is being disrupted all the time. There's all these competitors. There's a transition to electric vehicles. There's all of these strikes and there's regulation. I mean, it is almost as complicated as the world. But when you reduce it to that one dimension, you can get it very accurately with very little effort. So
Well,
it's really how you slice it.
see, it's interesting you should say that because I was involved in a company where we used time series to predict the future, right? It was revenue management, and we were going, okay, how much is this room going to cost? So it was hotel revenue management. So I would say, last year we charged 110 a night for this room. This year, what should we charge? Right. And if you funnel in all the factors that needed to be put into place, you could easily look at last year and say, well, it should be around that amount with a few other factors, whether there's conventions in town or what the weather's like, or if it's a holiday weekend, etc. But the reality is that uh, I think one of the reasons why those things work is because of human nature and the consistency of human nature, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to like you just look at the numbers statistically, you can say statistically these all things fell into place, but humans don't like change, so we like to maintain things the way they are, and that's one of the reasons why some of these things work is because of the way we are as human beings.
Yeah, which is fundamentally predictable to some degrees, but also unpredictable to others.
Right.
I don't think anyone thinks that, psychohistory is happening where all human
It
thought.
is. Psychohistory is happening.
Well, okay, I'll disagree with you on that one. I mean, I love the books and the TV show, but I don't think we can actually reduce things that much. But the point is that there is a bunch of different.
Eventually, if you can figure out one person, with enough computing power, you may be able to figure out more. Although it does become exponentially more difficult as you add human beings, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think weather forecasting is the thing there. No matter how good your computer is, if your system is sufficiently complicated, you get these NP hard problems where you would need like more computational power than you can produce in the solar system in order to be able to simulate
Exactly.
for steps in the
But
future.
weather is an interesting question because how much human influence how much human influence is there over the weather? Because I'm of the idea that even though we think our influence is very heavy, it's not as much because nature is just unbelievably the scale between us and what nature can do is completely different.
That's such an interesting question. I don't know, maybe you've interviewed people for Think Future. I mean, I was reading about a startup that is not a government, like not some sort of consortium, but just a startup that is going and just putting sulfur into our atmosphere in order to cool the planet.
Right.
Um, and it's just,
I have not talked to anybody
qualifies.
doing that, but I would love to. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah,
But
I
what
mean,
happens?
apparently it does cool a local region, and they measure the benefit as an equivalent amount of metric tons of CO2 that is being removed from the atmosphere. Again, I don't want to make a normative judgment about whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. It's at
Yeah,
least
exactly.
scientifically interesting that a small group of people with just a couple $100,000 can actually influence global climate. That's
Yeah.
kind of the thing. I mean, first, we didn't think we could affect the climate at all. Then we realized that collectively we were massively affecting the climate. Now we're realizing that even small organizations can maybe affect the climate. So I don't know what the answer to that question is, but humans are getting more powerful. So that if you're thinking about kind of the feedback mechanism of you have to predict the output of what we're going to do, but then what we do depends on what we predict will happen. You get everything gets more complicated the more powerful we get, and we're a very powerful species right now.
Right. But I guess the question is, I mean, I always thought that the scales are so different. I mean, if you look at what's happening with tsunamis and hurricanes and the amount of damage that nature can do and how little we can do to stop it, you think, well, we are very the scale is ridiculous,
Yeah.
right? And so, but if you consider we can do things in the local vicinity, how much of that will actually change the weather en masse? Because I can see how you could predict the weather because we aren't causing like human beings are because we're crazy. Well, we do all sorts of things to perturb all sorts of things, but can we really perturb the weather enough to actually change the prediction?
I think it will become more of an issue over time. Another example of this comes in earthquake forecasting.
Mm,
Earthquakes statistically just appear to be completely random. People
yeah,
for decades, people spent whole careers trying to predict earthquakes because they are fundamentally understandable. If you see all of those, magma shelves moving up and down, you should be able to see that train wreck coming from a distance and be able to,
you would
evacuate
think.
Port-au-Prince. But we didn't evacuate Port-au-Prince. We didn't see it coming. Like we still don't see these things coming. And not only is there a question of like, why can't we predict earthquakes and what will we have to do to actually predict them better? But can we interfere with them? So if you were to see
Mm.
them coming, could you just kind of set off a nuke, somewhere off in the distance, underground and like interfere with it and prevent an earthquake that would destroy a city? It's not inconceivable, but it's one of those things of people have been thinking about this for many, many decades, and we have very little to show for our work so far. So are we going to crack this, or is this fundamentally harder for some reason we don't currently understand?
Well, it almost seems as if it's our prediction mechanisms which are the problem, right? If you could say with an 80% prediction rate that this is going to happen, an 80% chance this might happen, then you might want to do something to stop it, right?
Right.
But if your numbers are 2%, 1%, it's kind of like what happens in the Bay Area all the time. You hear this warning, they publish it every now and then. Sometime in the next 50 years, we're going to have a massive earthquake. Well, that doesn't fill me with any kind of dread because
Right. Right. Right.
it could happen at any time. But if you told me it was happening in the next month, then maybe we could do something about it, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's I want to, stimulate your audience to kind of think about this. The evidence from geopolitical forecasting is that we can predict, for example, Russia invading Ukraine. The US government predicted it like 4 months before it happened. Like the top forecasters I know predicted it. Some of them have, wrote down their thoughts ahead of time, did a postmortem after. It's like, I saw it coming. I thought it was going to happen. Here's why. Here's what actually happened. I was right about this. It
Yep.
seems forecastable, but that big earthquake that's going to hit the Bay Area or Seattle, we're just sitting there just with giant question mark icons over our head saying, we've been studying this for decades. Top scientists have been looking into it, and we are no more able to predict those than we were 50 years ago. So
Is
while
that telling us?
some things
So you're
are
telling me
not,
that we can predict human behavior, but we can't predict natural behavior?
in some cases, yes. Isn't that surprising?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
mean
I mean,
that's
the
the thing.
thing,
Yeah.
but it also depends on what the human behavior is, right? Because something like an invasion requires troop movements. It requires all sorts of sort of
Mhm.
visible things that can be detected and tracked. But me
Mhm.
changing my mind to decide I'm going to have a taco for breakfast instead of yogurt, how are you going to predict that?
Yeah, well, yeah, as I was saying earlier, I think that is still a big open question. Like, can you predict the behavior of one individual? But in terms of Russia invading Ukraine, first of all, the individual in charge of that decision had been talking about it for a long time, and something had
Right.
happened in 2014. So there was already evidence just on that. But like you said, there were troop movements, like there was stuff in newspapers, like there was a lot of evidence. Now, the judgment to determine whether that evidence meant it would actually happen, there's been a lot of evidence that China would invade Taiwan. They've been talking about it for many years. They have mobilized troops. They have done military drills. They said they're going to do it. They haven't done it yet. So you can't just say because of that evidence, therefore it's very likely. But in
Right.
the case of Russia, Ukraine, the most calibrated forecasters with the best judgment, all things considered, said, yeah, I can't be certain about this, but I think there's a very high chance, that, next year there will be like a real ground invasion involving like hundreds of thousands of troops.
Yeah. So what would you say is the number one trait that a good futurist should have? Like someone who's forecasting?
Yeah, again, at this point, I'm more of an expert on what makes an AI system a good forecaster rather than humans. So I'll just defer to
What would you
Tesla.
give? What would you give an AI system? What does make an AI system a good forecaster?
Yeah, well, to try to answer your question, one very simple thing you could do, which, this is an experiment you can run on a weekend. You don't need a whole company to do this, is, put in different prompting techniques into your LLM of choice, giving it different strategies for forecasting and see what happens. And I think you can very quickly verify that some of the research from Tetlog's lab over the 2010s is borne out. Don't get too married to any one theory. Consider many different ways that it could unfold. Consider different inside outside views and try to weigh them all together. Like try to kind of be a society of mind yourself. Like imagine that there were five of you working on it differently, all coming to different conclusions, and trying to integrate those within your own mind. To the extent that you just have one view on a question, you're almost certainly going to get it wrong, or at least you're going to get some of them so terribly wrong that your overall score on a set of forecasting questions is going to be atrocious, maybe even worse than chance. So,
Right.
stay agnostic, stay humble, consider many different possibilities, and don't get attached to any one. If there's one single piece of advice that is borne out by the literature, like that will make you a better forecaster.
But would it be helpful to use different tools, different engines, or you can
Yeah.
do this with the
So,
same engine?
yes, there's some research coming out of the Forecast Research Institute, a great organization, about just using LLMs kind of casually as a human forecaster. So I'm looking into some question about, when is the, Red Sea going to get unblocked or something. It's very natural to just go to ChatGPT and just say, hey, what's going on in the Red Sea? Like,
Hmm.
10 years ago, you would have used Google, you would have used Wikipedia, you would have read just the news. Yeah, like as a human actually reading the news. Imagine that. These days, you ask the AI to read the
No
news.
one does that anymore. They don't even
Exactly.
ask search engines anymore.
Right, right. Everything is just kind of being filtered through ChatGPT. The most recent thing is the emergence of deep research has some evals on this because we were very interested in this. We made a whole benchmark out of it. But when you turn on deep research, Claude has a thing called research, Gemini and ChatGPT have a thing called deep research, Grok has deep search, DeepSeek. They all have these kind of deep something or other. And we've been evaluating them, and some are better and some are worse. But I think it's quite normal to say, hey, don't just summarize the news for me in 30 seconds, but go read everything you can find on this and write me like a 5-page report. I
Right.
think it's just a very reasonable way to get up to speed on a topic as a forecaster, trying to understand like the real detailed intricacies. Like, is there going to be an Israel Iran ceasefire or something like that? Just go read everything and summarize it for me. That's kind of step one. I think that's a good idea. Beyond step one, though, I mean, this is what FutureSearch is trying to figure out. And again, just kind of take the human out of the loop entirely, just replace it with an end-to-end AI system. Like, what can you do other than just being informed and following good practices? There's quite a lot there. It really is a frontier. It's a very, very hard problem, but it is amenable to like the standard techniques that people are using to build more capable AI systems.
How specific do you need to make the questions that you're asking?
Yeah, this is another very interesting question. In the art and science of human forecasting, you need to make them extremely specific. Otherwise,
Hmm.
people just kind of get lost in the details. The platform that I ran at Google, we had numerous disputes about like, you asked whether this project would get canceled, and what they really did is defund it, but that didn't really mean they canceled it. And it's like I was betting whether they would defund it.
It's a good way to cancel things is defund them, right?
Right. So again, as the admins of the platform would say, no, 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 that counts as canceling the project. We're resolving this as this was canceled.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and it's a big problem with human incentives. Basically, humans, especially if you want to get paid, which is kind of the premise of prediction markets, if you want to get paid for contributing your good forecast to a system, then you really want to be sure that you're answering the right question, and you will get very, very upset if the question is not interpreted the way that you want. This is not true with AI systems. AI systems will forecast at the same level, the same quality level, no matter what's going on, because they're not going to object and say, this is unfair. You
Yeah,
screwed
yeah.
me on this
There's
one.
none of that's in there.
So, for my whole time in forecasting, and every great forecasting platform, every great forecaster has extremely good understanding of how to make these really nitpicky, extremely precise questions to kind of avoid these controversies. And in the age of AI, it just doesn't really matter anymore. You can ask like a very open-ended question, and it will give you kind of the same level of analysis as if you gave like a very like what is the definition of China invading Taiwan? Like if they
Right,
send air, if they send water, like amphibious troops, do they have to send a missile? Do they have to occupy it? What if they just attack it and then just leave? In
right.
AI, you can answer any and all of those, and it won't really mind which one. Whereas humans, you have to spend like an hour pinning them down on exactly what you mean. Then they will do their research and give you their
So that
probability.
makes AI really useful, if you ask me. I mean, super useful in this case.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, given that human forecasting works surprisingly well, I think that's kind of the main finding over the last 15 years. One question has been, well, why is it not more used? Hedge funds, governments, the CIA, why don't they use forecasting more? Part of the answer is the CIA and hedge funds and governments have used forecasting, and some currently still do. But it's operationally extremely hard to do.
Mm,
Humans very messy. They take a long time to research. They disagree with each other. They nitpick each other. There's another question is, confidential information. Do you want to tell your forecaster what's really going on in Israel or Iran, or like is that only for spies?
yeah.
AI has very few of these problems. Like you can just kind of pose any amount of information to any question, it will just very quickly give you an answer. It just needs to be good. And humans are still much better than AIs. But once that's no longer true, I think it'll be kind of foolish to play these games with humans in the same way that many other domains are falling to AI. Forecasting will eventually be one of them.
So is there forecasting being used, say, for stock picking today?
It depends what you mean. I mean, every, trading institution does forecasting at least implicitly. Like
Sure.
any bet that they make could be operationalized as an explicit probabilistic forecast. Many of them do think about it explicitly that way, and others just kind of do it implicitly. Prediction markets are kind of having a moment, especially after recent U.S. presidential elections.
Hmm.
Both Kalshi and Polymarket have multi-billion-dollar valuations now, or at least proposed. But really, like the stock market is the biggest forecasting platform that we have. And if you look at option prices, like what is the probability that a stock will be above or below a certain value at a certain point of time in the future? That is just literally a straight up forecasting question. So all the prices we have on every option, every derivative, on every commodity, currency, company, everything, those are all forecasts. So to some degree, forecasting is already endemic. And yeah, in your example of trying to figure out what to set hotel nightly rates based on last year's nightly rates, those are all forecasting questions too. The thing that's been strange to me over the last 10 years getting into this field is how rarely folks working on that treat them explicitly as forecasting questions and use the
Mm.
best practices from the forecasting literature. We often kind of forget that actually forecasting is a science and there's studies showing how to do it better and worse and a bunch of data on this. Time series
I know.
forecasting.
How do you convince people who don't think that's got that much value? Because I mean, I've talked to many companies, especially my work with the Institute for the Future, who are like, "Well, this is great, but how will it affect me today? And how do I know that this is even going to be accurate?
Yeah,
How do you do that?"
it's very complicated, and I won't claim to have a complete answer to that. But I will say I have, especially within Google, I pitched the forecast that I was producing to senior management many times. Occasionally, I got people very interested and to actually look at them. Most of the time, I could not. I've brought FutureSearch Tech to a lot of, well-known multinational businesses and said, I have these forecasts. Like, how can I make these useful to you? The majority of them, I could not find a way to operationalize them, but some I could. So I have some experience in this, but I would basically say it's kind of an unsolved problem. There's a couple of
Hmm.
techniques. Um, One, probably the most powerful technique is conditional forecasting. So not to simply say, what's going to happen to your company, to your regulators, to your customers, but to say, if you do X, what will happen to your company, to your
Oh, I
customers?
like that. I like that. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
because at the end of the day, that's what what it should be operationalized as is I have to make a decision and I need a forecast on what decision would be better or worse. So if you can formulate things of like what decisions are you looking at, and then we'll just predict the outcomes if you go one way or another, that can just be much more immediately useful. Another thing I found that's kind of niche, or I mean maybe not niche, but very specific to my practice is if you go to a company, you try to predict what will happen to that company, they're not that interested. If you go to a company and try to predict what will happen to their competitors, they will just be wrapped. Like companies love to know what's
I
going on with
should
their
use that.
competitors.
That's not a bad idea. I like that.
Yeah. It's funny because I think if you work for a company X and I tell you I think company X is going to grow or shrink or get into this market or that market, they kind of think like, well, you're kind of telling me my own story. But if you tell them about company Y that they're competing with, they don't have any knowledge of company Y. They don't know all the people at company Y. They just know that they're really affected by company Y. And so somebody can tell them what company Y is up to. It's just immediately interesting and useful to them.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, so one of the things I believe is like everything will happen. The only question is when. So how do you pinpoint timing on these predictions, on these forecasts?
Yeah, I mean, this
Or
again,
can you?
there's a whole art and science to that. One of the things that really tricks me is that so almost all of the literature on forecasting tournaments, from which we have the best scientific evidence on this, the questions lasted for 1 year because there have been many
Mm,
tournaments that have just been run for 1 year. So for the Russia Ukraine stuff or China Taiwan stuff, you're always asking like, will the thing happen next year? And a big question in the literature is if you get good at that, how good are you at predicting things that are 5 years out?
mm,
And with AI, I've been interested in the other direction, which is how good can you be predicting at something that's 5 days out?
mm.
Because when you're iterating on an AI system, it's very helpful to have a short feedback loop. It's very helpful to make a change to your system and be able to find out 5 days later, is this better or worse? But predicting things 5 days in the future versus 5 years in the future are almost completely different exercises. Things happening 5 days in the future are based on like very tactical, like, will this specific person do this specific thing very quickly?
Exactly.
5 years in the future is about like understanding broad trends of society. Like, what are the real fundamental causal forces pushing people in one direction or another? Because as you said, Chris, if you wait long enough, things will happen. So if
Yeah.
you predict 5 years, sometimes it's actually easier to predict the far future than the near future. Because the far future, things like Moore's law, for example, like any particular year, how much more efficient will computers get and what will that enable? Who knows? But over the arc of technology, it's a virtual guarantee that things will get more efficient and that new capabilities will come online. So you can actually be more certain about things more like farther in the future. So I
Certain
don't have an
things.
answer to your
Certain
question.
things.
Sorry?
Certain things. Certain
Certain
things you
things.
can.
Yeah. But I think that the transferability between short-term predictions and long-term predictions, again, is something that's very, very important to get right, and it's something that's not very well understood.
And is it so when you're doing these 5 day predictions, can that inform your longer term predictions, or is it a completely different animal?
I will say, as much as I'm claiming that they're very different animals, the techniques are sufficiently similar. I guess basically, I don't have evidence that they're overlapping enough, like not to my satisfaction rigorously. But the techniques are similar enough. Like trying to predict what will happen in 5 days is very much just kind of a breakdown of, okay, is 5 days enough for this person to do it? Like, what are their options? Like, what did they do last time they were in this situation? Like, what are their incentives? All of those things. And in
Right.
predicting something 5 years out, you ask a very similar set of questions. And you have to have good judgment over the data you find. As you said before, you never get complete data that just answers the question. Never happens in forecasting. You always get some of the data and you don't have other parts of the data. So being able to reason about, well, what I have suggests this, what I don't have leaves this much uncertainty left over, therefore I'm going to predict this. That's a very similar task, whether you're thinking 5 days or 5 years in the future. So if you get very, very good at that, and that is extremely hard for humans or for AI, it's very, very hard to exercise that judgment well about what you don't know. If you get good at that, I think it transfers.
So I'm assuming you've done predictions, and time has passed, and have those predictions have come true, have not come true. What's your hit rate? I mean, have you been able to calculate that?
Yeah, so there's a couple different answers to that question. The main trouble with FutureSearch, being an almost 2-year-old company, is that we get data about what the quality of our systems were a while ago.
Hmm.
So the first forecaster that we built, so we incorporated in August of 2023. By December of 2023, we had
Well,
a
you guys are really young.
Yeah,
You barely
exactly.
started.
Well, because again, we were fascinated, and a lot of us, came from this forecasting community. We'd all worked together before as technologists. We were fascinated by the fact that humans really could predict the future like surprisingly well. And
Mm.
so we all came from different fields. Like, I was working on self-driving cars, but I got the bug. It's like, wait, how is it possible that humans can, very few humans, but humans can be so good at this? I thought it was all just kind of random chance. But in studying this, it was when GPT-4 came out, like I described earlier, we realized, wait a minute, like AI is good enough now that this isn't just a human game anymore. This is an AI game as well. So we incorporated like basically a few months after GPT-4 came out when we realized like, no, this is really going to work. And yeah, it only took us a few months after that to build a pretty good forecaster. And so we basically had a tournament that lasted for 2024, predicting some of the biggest trends of 2024, things like who's going to be the biggest lithium producers and like all these geopolitical things and these economic indices, all these things, and went up against real humans on a real betting platform using our just the autonomous system. And so I have some data on how well that did, but that was this forecaster we had in January of 2024.
Mm.
Much better forecasters now. In that tournament, we did beat the average human in the betting
Oh,
markets.
that's great.
So
That's
that was
excellent.
great. I think we were the first to achieve
See,
that.
the first time out, you beat the human. That's great. So I'm assuming you're going to probably
Well,
do even better next time.
yeah, I mean, we were obviously happy to have that result. It was not a trivial finding, but humans on average aren't very good at this type. Even humans who participate actively in betting markets are not generally very
So
good.
the
So,
bar is not very high, is what you're saying.
yeah, exactly. So that wasn't that impressive for us to achieve. Beating really good humans, other teams have tried this in the intermediate time. Nobody has even come close to beating the best humans, like not close.
Mm.
The most recent approach we have, we just put a paper out on pass casting. Without belaboring all of the details, basically we try to address the feedback loop problem where we, instead of needing to wait a year to find out what would happen, we would take advantage of basically stale caches of the internet plus the training window cutoff of LLMs to build a forecasting environment where you could iterate on your forecaster, click a button, wait, 30 minutes and get a bunch of scores right away. Um,
Nice.
so the paper on that just came out a few weeks ago, and we used it to iterate on a forecaster. And we have some results, some of which are not published yet. So the best sense of what is our hit rate, like how good is the forecaster we have, largely can be seen in that paper, like what those 300 forecasting questions are, like kind of the nature of them. Like one detail there is that all those questions were only asking about the future up to 3 months in the future. And that was just for the expedience of being able to build the benchmark and actually use it to
Sure.
use the training window cutoffs and do our kind of the caches of the internet that we built in order to enable this. And so a question you might have reading that is like, okay, so that's your track record predicting 3 months out. What's your track record predicting 3 years out? And then just as
Hmm.
we were discussing, I have no data on that because the only way to truly get data on that is to wait 3 years. And that's a
Exactly.
long time.
Which is always going to be the problem, right?
Yes.
But it sounds like your models are getting better and better.
Yes.
So when do you think, so do you have any, have you ever applied that to your models to see where you think we might hit the moment where we can actually predict something like 5, 10 years out?
Yeah, I think it's a great question to use your forecaster to predict how good of a forecaster it will be.
Exactly.
And yes, we do look at this, but the main challenge is that the basically predicting the rate of technological progress is probably the single hardest thing out of any category of forecasting I can think of. Basically, what kinds of like scientific progress will we have? Because ultimately, it is like a science and engineering challenge.
Right.
The track record of experts on that is quite poor. There's even some data, from Metaculous, where I was CTO, comparing basically a set of questions about AI to a set of questions about everything. And the difference in the quality of the human crowd was dramatic.
Mm,
If you just ask everything, like economics, politics, business, popular affairs, all that stuff, humans do like very, very well. If you ask a
interesting.
bunch of questions about AI, it's as if the humans were all just amateurs. AI questions are just way, way harder to get right than questions about Beyonce or Trump or whatever it is. So
I could
basically,
totally see that.
we don't know, like when will we have superhuman AI forecasting? I hope soon, and we have a lot of progress. I hope it's used well. To put a date on it, I mean, I think it would be kind of it would be a kind of false confidence, I think, if I put a range on it, unless I give you a really wide range. Like I'd say 80% confidence interval, we'll have it between like 6 months and 6 years from now. But that's
Well,
not.
that's a nice range.
Yeah, exactly. To be more precise than that means you can predict the rate of AI progress. And as much as we'd like to, that is just a very hard problem.
So are you personally confident enough to talk to your AI and ask about stock tips and things like that, or is that not,
Yeah,
we're not there yet?
I was looking at a prototype a couple hours ago that was producing stock tips in kind of a new way and trying to evaluate the quality of it. So absolutely, we have done commissioned research for some clients where we do look at the stock market and use the best techniques. But personally, I'm in a privileged position as CEO of FutureSearch because we have two elite, brilliant forecasters on staff. So if I really want to know something, I can just ask the human. The humans are still state of the art. So until the AI eclipses the humans, I just have people on staff that I can ask for advice on things like this.
Yeah, well, it's still better. Humans are still better at all this.
Yeah,
So
for
it's time to
now.
think. It's time to think like a futurist. It's the year 2035. Do you think we've actually cracked this nut by that point, and we'd be able to accurately predict those kind of distances, like 6 months, 8 months, 10 years, 5 years?
I would say in 2035, I would give higher than 90% chance that AIs will be superhuman at forecasting. Like
Mm,
AI systems will be better than any individual human or any group of humans at predicting anything, full stop.
wow.
But the rest of our conversation was about, but how good is that? Because the current humans today are great, but they're not good enough that there's one in, every CEO's office and in the White House and the Oval Office. We don't have these humans basically running the show right now. So if AI only gets as good as the best humans, like the really brilliant people that I employ, it's not clear that that is a world-changing invention. Like we already have those humans, and it hasn't really changed the world in a big way. Yeah, like a couple government agencies use them, a couple of hedge funds use them, but it hasn't really changed the world. So I think the really more profound question is, will we have strongly superhuman forecasting by 2035? And that one, I would say maybe like 40 or 50% chance that we have that. And that would be a world changing thing. Like we would never think about history or politics or business ever the same way if we had strongly superhuman forecasting available in software that was like readily available. So I'm very excited about that future. I'm also a little bit nervous about it. It sounds a bit dangerous.
Everything will turn out fine. Trust me.
It has so far, but I don't know. A lot of
So how
folks
do
like to think about nuclear war, and I think people think we kind of got lucky on that one. So we'll see what happens with AI.
so how do we get people to listen to these forecasters though? I mean, that's the other thing. It's like you could have a super forecaster who is super accurate all the time, but how do you get people to listen to them, and how do you get people to understand that these are, this is an important data point that you should consider?
I think the more that you get strongly superhuman, the more this problem just goes away. In
Mm,
science fiction tropes, or even going back to the Oracle at Delphi, Nostradamus, we've had, the idea of soothsayers who can just accurately tell the future in popular culture for thousands of years. If it was truly an oracle, I don't think anyone would need convincing to talk to it. I think people would line up to talk to it.
right.
Certain quality, it will kind of be oracle-ish, like it will give you the best possible answer you could ever have on whatever decision you're facing. And I think people will line up to use it. If it's kind of good but not great, then we have this problem of like, well, this is still the best evidence we have, but it's far from decisive, and you have to use a lot of your judgment, and it doesn't really answer your question. And then it's more if you have good epistemics, if your decision is really important, if you have high accountability, like you really want to get it right, and if you get it wrong, there's going to be like a lawsuit or something, then maybe there's going to be more of, using these things in this intermediate state. But yeah, I mean, this is, think future, where you asked about 2035. I think my basic answer is it'll be so good. Like, how would you not use it? How could you not use a superhuman AI forecaster?
Yeah, nobody would not use it. Everyone would use it.
I think
Then that would change the predictions again, knowing
that's
that
true.
other people are using them.
That is true. It
So
would, yeah.
it's ever more complicated.
Yeah, but then the AI just gets better and better. I mean, that's the accelerationist world that we're in right now, right?
So would you say that today, where are we at today? I mean, do you think we're on the path that will get us there in 10 years, or is there something holding us back?
Yeah, so to restate, we have maybe closed half the distance between like a really naive, dumb chatbot forecast and the world's best humans in the last, say, 2.5 years.
Mm.
If you close the rest of that distance in another 2.5 years, like a very simple, like kind of nonsensical linear extrapolation, then you're at this kind of parity in, 2027, 2028. If you can go that distance again in another 2.5 years, you've got something superhuman that is like truly, like it would be kind of uncanny how prescient it would be by 2030, 2031. And
Mm.
then if you took that one more time, you're getting to 2035 and you're getting something that is almost an oracle in its nature. Like you would always defer to it in the way that when you're playing a game of chess, you would never consider listening to a human when there was a chess engine. Like it would never even cross your mind to ask a human what was going on
Wow.
in the chess position. You would always use the AI. So that's kind of the rough path. Again, that's an extremely crude linear extrapolation from two data points.
But I doubt if it'll be linear. It'll probably be closer to exponential, right? I mean, the way things are going.
It could hit seriously diminishing returns, though, like the kind of the
Mm.
frontier of knowability. It might just be like weather forecasting. It basically gets near perfect for forecasting the weather for the next 2 or 3 days, but just never gets good at forecasting the weather beyond that. Because that's
That's
what weather
true.
forecasting is, right? Like, 2 weeks out forecast for the weather, or it's just like flipping coins. Like no matter how good it gets, we just can't answer that question.
Yeah.
So there will be some
So
things that can't
there's a
be
good
predicted.
chance that that might happen, though. That maybe that's the state of the world. Maybe that's the state of reality in some
Yeah,
ways.
and I think there's a case to be made that the world is more like that, where things are just basically fundamentally unknowable, and no amount of computing power and no amount of intelligence will figure it out. Again, I don't really believe that because of how good humans can be today, and that's
Mm.
just the starting point. That's kind of the opening shot in the race towards super forecasting is the best humans that we have today. If you can already be this good with the techniques we have now, it makes me feel like more of the world is reducible to math. Again, not psychohistory, not just predict everything. Maybe something 50-50 between
Yeah,
complete
I mean,
unknowability.
Asimov never said that human beings aren't part of the whole psychohistory thing, right? It's not just machines; it's humans and machines working together, just like we are now,
That's true.
right?
That's true. Although again, in chess, that is eclipsed. Like the humans aren't even relevant for understanding chess anymore. Like it's all
Well,
entirely
that's a closed system, right? Just like the Warcraft example I gave earlier. It's like
right.
within a closed system, AI can totally dominate.
That's
They
right.
can dominate anything now, but we are not in a closed system.
That's
And
right.
although if you could say that the planet is sort of a closed system, if you knew enough about every little aspect of it, it gets to the point where it's essentially a closed system. Like once you leave the atmosphere, like once you get to the edges of the atmosphere, we are a closed system, but we may never have that data, that level of data.
Yeah, I mean that's a fascinating point, and that's kind of another open question. Like, to what extent is this kind of a data gathering thing? Like, do you need to release a swarm of drones to take pictures every 60 seconds of every single square inch of Earth? Do you need to have like surveillance on humans that is recording their every thought? My sense, again, from forecasting so far is you can get very far in accuracy without really knowing any of that stuff. One of Tetlock's original findings from over a decade ago now is that his team of super forecasters who were basically all just amateurs working at his lab trying it for like a year or two outperformed the CIA when the CIA had literal spies and spy satellites. But on questions given to CIA analysts versus Tetlock's kind of the joke was that they were kind of retired crossword moms, just like people just kept sitting at home, just news junkies, just reading the New York Times. I mean, the difference in scores was profound. Like Tetlock's group, like greatly outperformed the CIA without access to any of that confidential information. So there's
Mm.
early signals. It's not just data. Like we like to think these days, it's all just data. Like data in, data out. If you have good data, it's good. If you have bad data, it's garbage. Really, there's a huge amount of room for actual intelligence and actual judgment. And you can get very far without having just data on everything that's going on. It might be the case, though, that we hit severe diminishing returns. And like until you start collecting vastly larger amounts of data, you can't get very far. But I have to say, I'm skeptical of that. I think intelligence is just intelligence and judgment is just judgment. And you just need really, really good intelligence and judgment.
So would you be able to take, and this is, I know we have to wrap up, but it's like, would you be able to take sort of the special sauce that human beings have and somehow put it into AI?
Yeah, so, well, a couple things on this. One, as you say, AI systems are already composed of human thoughts, like they're already trained on vast amounts of text. So, like every deduction that's in every single Shakespeare play based on insufficient information is in the LLMs already.
Hmm.
So, to some degree, the pre-training process of LLMs as we know it gets a lot of that stuff. And then in the post-training, like there's various things that you can fine-tune on to try to encode a little bit more human judgment. So, a lot of that is happening already. The main thing is that it's not really forecaster judgment that's in there. One kind of interesting thing about almost part of the premise of FutureSearch is that there aren't really good forecasts on the web. Like in the training data of LLMs are not, like as I've worked with some of the world's best forecasters, I've seen them work out things in detail. None of that stuff is online. Like you can look for it. We have, like, there's not a lot of data that exists on this, but the practice exists. So like a lot of other fields, I'm sure plenty of other guests you've had have talked about automating things like software engineering or law or medicine. A
Yep.
lot of that task is just getting like really, really great software engineering, law, and medicine cleaned up and into the training data of these models. For those disciplines, there's already a lot, and so you just need more, and you need it to be cleaner and better. And you really want
Yeah, they're like the closed systems we were talking about before, like within this group. Yeah.
So we don't really have that for forecasting, but if we did have it for forecasting, that would kind of make forecasting look a little bit more like a closed system. But I agree with you. Forecasting is fundamentally not a closed system. Again, it's the entire world. There's chaos theory. Anything from anywhere can influence anything else. You can come up with any number of cases like, the US didn't nuke Kyoto because, Secretary of Defense's wife had a nice trip there. Like this,
Yeah.
you can't predict everything.
No, it's not possible.
Yeah.
Well, this
So
is
it's
this is
always
this
open.
is so this has been fantastic. So thank you so much. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, futuresearch.ai, reach out to us. We are forecasting with AI and humans. We can look at your questions. We have it as a service available, and we've kind of got software coming out the door too.
Excellent. Can you recommend some sort of resources for people who are interested in forecasting and getting into it more?
Yeah, it is the book Super Forecasting by Tetlock. That is still kind of the Bible. That kind of just walks through the nature of the problem and everything we knew up until 2016. That book still tells you almost everything you'd want to know. For more recent stuff, I'd encourage you to check out our writing. So futuresearch.ai, look at some of our papers, look at some of our blogs on this. We have some basically like, what is the frontier of AI forecasting, and ultimately it is all about AI. It's been humans for a while, but it's going to be AI going forward.
Very cool. So start with super forecasting and then hit up your website.
That's right.
Awesome. And by the way, I just wanted to mention when we've had our first call, we actually had more AI note takers on the call than human beings for the first time ever. So I just thought that was like a milestone that I finally reached. I knew it was going to happen eventually, but like three, I think it was 3-2. So we had three note takers, AI note takers, and two human beings. So eventually we're going to get to the point where it's just AI note takers.
Yep, and eventually they're going to be predicting things too. They're going to be like, "Yeah, Chris is about to ask you about your background. Get your answer ready." Yep.
So do I even need to be there? I'll just send my avatar. It can do it for me.
Yeah, you as a futurist and an inventor and a podcaster, me as the CEO of a startup. All of us do have to wonder about the longevity of our jobs. Like AI is coming for all of us one way or another.
Exactly. And maybe we'll be on a beach in Aruba or something like that by then.
Hopefully.
Lift our burdens.
That's right.
All right, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Pixels and philosophies merge and mold, a future untold, unseen.